Hello and welcome back to Principles of Macroeconomics. I'm your host, Dr. B. Today we'll be exploring concepts of thinking like an economist. Before we get started, just a quick housekeeping notes. For those of you on the call, as you have questions, please feel free to unmute your mic and ask your question. Before we get started with today's lecture, I just want to highlight a couple of key areas in the classroom. By now, you should have all accessed Blackboard. And in your classroom, your classroom looks just like this. All of your course content is here. All of the WebEx recordings, for example, like the one that we're doing right now, all the recordings will be posted both here in Blackboard and also emailed to you. So if you ever miss anything, if you want to go back and re-listen or whatever, it'll be available to you. So in order to access your homework assignments, and also the PowerPoint presentations and any other additional content to help you with respect to your homework assignments and quizzes, the best way to do it is to select each module. So module one is where we currently are. Last week was module one, week one. So in the classroom, click module one, it'll open up. It'll show you the first 4 weeks. Week one is what we had just completed as of yesterday. So by yesterday, you should have completed your chapter one quiz. Unless, of course, you were just enrolled into the course, then in that case, you might need a few more days. That's okay, don't worry about that. So if you could, within the next 2 to 3 days, complete your chapter one quiz after you've read chapter one in the book. Now, within each week, make sure you click on that respective week and read through all of the content. So week one, module one, week one, open the week one document. It'll go over the learning objectives. The PowerPoint presentation is in there. All you gotta do is download it, nice and easy. And there'll also be a couple of nice little short videos, just kind of reinforce concepts. And then once you've read through all of that, you read the chapter, make sure you introduce yourself to the class, and then complete your chapter one quiz. All of that was technically due yesterday, but I know that some of you literally were just enrolled in this course less than 2 days ago. So I understand that, and I'm more than willing to work with you. Don't worry, there will be no late penalty on that submission, especially for the first week, I understand. Okay, we're currently in week two. Today we're going to go over chapters 2 and 3. 2 and 3. Each chapter takes us about 40 minutes to get through. Within week two, make sure you select the week two document, read through all of that fine stuff. You'll find the PowerPoint presentations there and any other additional content. Make sure you read chapters 2 and 3 in your textbook, and then go ahead and complete the homework for chapters 2 and 3. Great news with homework assignments and quizzes, as I mentioned earlier, is you have 2 attempts for each homework assignment and quiz. With the 2 attempts, the higher of the 2 grades will be accepted into the grade book. Yay! That makes life a lot easier. Each homework assignment is worth 5% of your total grade, so please, please, please never miss anything in this course. Each assignment is worth 5% of your total grade. Do not miss anything, okay? Now with that, let's go ahead and jump into the content for chapter 2, thinking like an economist. We all think like an economist because we're constantly thinking about prices, about quantity, and of course we're thinking about prices as they relate to total cost for things that we buy on a regular basis. So what is the difference between an economist and everyone else? An economist thinks about things like supply and demand for products that we would normally buy on a regular basis. They think of how the economy works, right? In macroeconomics, we look at things on what we call the macro level. The macro level, think of it like the high view. We're looking at the whole country rather than just one demographic or just one product. We're looking at the whole country, okay? And we're looking at it from the perception of how the economy as a whole works. And I'll show you a couple of diagrams and how the economy interacts with various elements from a perspective of a whole country. Okay? So think of the United States, think of how each state interacts with each other, and how the United States as a whole interacts with other countries. That's what we call macroeconomics. It's the macro level. It's the higher view of economics. Economists. Who are economists? What are they? Well, technically they're scientists. Um, a scientist is a very broad term. Okay. When we think of a scientist, we think of somebody in a lab coat. That's what I think of a scientist. Apparently I'm a scientist too, allegedly. When I got my PhD in accounting and management, they said, "Oh, you're a scientist." I go, "Well, what do you mean by that?" They said, "Well, you conduct a lot of research and you examine a lot of various components for your degree, and through that process, you learned how to become a scientist." I said, "Oh, that's kind of cool. I never thought of it that way." The same thing is with economists. Economists are considered as scientists because they try to explain the world in different ways. They explain it how supply and demand interfaces with the global economy and so on. There's a lot of different factors. And economists also play as what we call policy advisors. What this means is they look at the economy as a whole and they try to think of ways to improve the economy. That's the idea of policy, public policy. For those of you who are in the public policy realm, you probably thought of policy as being applied to a whole government, which is true. So in the White House, the president has economic advisors, and these economic advisors tell the president of the United States, how the economy is performing. They talk about things like inflation. They talk about things like trade between countries, so forth and so on. They set policy for the United States. It goes through Congress and all that fun stuff. But that's what an economist is. So the idea behind it is they look at testing theories out and I'm trying to better understand how the world works, right? We know that the world is complex, so that's one of the assumptions. And economists try to make the world easier to understand. And to do this, they study things like international trade. The word international simply means between two or more countries. Between two or more countries, that's international, right? Like the United States and Canada, that is an international border to the north of us. The United States and Mexico, that is an international border to the south of us. So we do trade with both Canada and Mexico. We exchange goods and services between our countries. There's a lot of good things that come out of trade, and we'll talk a lot about trade in this chapter. But one of the best things that comes out of trade is lower costs for consumers. If I can produce something in another country at a lower cost, I can sell it for a lower price. And so what that means is we, the consumers, can purchase goods or services at lower price points than if we were to make it here at home. It might be a little deep, but we'll talk more about it. Economists look at various models to study economic issues. These represent more complicated reality. In other words, as international trade goes, there are different currencies that we use, right? The United States uses the US dollar. Canada uses the Canadian dollar. Mexico uses the peso. The European Union, which includes most countries in Europe, use the euro. Great Britain, or England, uses the British pound. Japan, was it yen, right? Japan has yen. China has the yuan. Uh, I could go on and on and on, right? Each country has its own form of currency for the most part. That makes things complex because the value of currency changes over time. We'll dive a little bit deeper, but it's just kind of give you an understanding of where we're going. Okay, so models. The idea of a model is simply this. We're developing a roadmap to better understand how the world works. It's a plan. It's a model. Okay, it's a think of like a model car or it's a model. It's a prototype. It's a concept. It's an idea. It they're models, right? A model is simply to tell us this is what it should look like, but we also know that that's not always the case. In economics, we visualize the economy using this thing called a circular flow diagram. The circular flow diagram shows us how US dollars flow through markets within a house, with a company, within the global economy, and with the country. It's a visual representation of the flow of money. So is what the circular flow diagram shows us. There are two kinds of decision makers in this country. There are companies, also known as firms. And there are households. Household is people living in a house, right? It's a family unit. Family unit is a decision-making component. A company is another decision-making component. In this concept, we as households and companies are interacting within markets. Okay, that's not gods, it's goods. Sorry about that. I must have typed a little bit too fast. The markets represent a market for goods and services, and markets for production. Now, let me just explain what a good is. Not a god, a good. A good is a tangible product. It could be anything. It could be an automobile. It could be a house. It could be everything that is in your possession. Those are goods, okay, that you purchased at some point in the past. Services. The basic idea of a service is someone else provides a service. For example, a dentist, that's a service. A lawyer, that's a service. An accountant, that's a service. Someone who mows your lawn, that's a service. The trash collection, that's a service. I could keep going on, right? There's no physical good being exchanged for the service. A restaurant, that's a service. They're providing a service to you, right? But there's no physical good involved. And market factors of production. Okay, I'm going to try to bend your mind a little bit, but not too bad. Production, manufacturing. In manufacturing, there's a couple of things I want you to understand. And we're talking about how to manufacture a product or a good. There are several costs associated with production. We call these inputs. They make up the total cost of a finished good. Inputs include things like raw materials, labor, and factory overhead. Raw materials, labor, factory overhead. These are all costs associated with manufacturing a finished good. Call these factors of production. Okay, that went by fast. That was weird. Uh, okay, here's the circular flow. The circular flow. Now, this graph gets a little confusing looking, right? There's a lot of inputs and outputs and so forth and so on. We see how households and firms interact with each other. Now, let's think of let's take it from the firm first, okay? A company. A company has outputs and inputs. Okay, so the red is the represents more of the outputs, or I'm sorry, more of the inputs, and the green represents more of the outputs. An input simply means what's going into, right? Output means what's coming out of. Companies. What goes into the company represents the factors of production. Factors of production include things like labor, land, capital. Okay, labor, land, capital. Labor, that's the manual labor that goes into making a product. Land, that's the factory. Okay, that's the factory that the goods are being manufactured in. Capital, that is physical cash that the company uses in order to purchase their raw materials and pay their various expenses. Those are all factors of production. The factors of production go into the company, the labor, the land, the capital, raw materials, things like that. What comes out of the company is the cost of goods sold. Okay, cost of goods sold. That's the finished product cost. And that goes into the market as a finished product. And the household buys the finished product. So the finished product is an input for the household, an output for the firm. Does that make sense? Outputs, or I'm sorry, inputs. Are we good so far? You all understand the red part of this chart, right? I'm still here. You all can still hear me? Not sleeping.
Yes.
All right. Thanks, Jazz. Okay.
Yes, it makes sense.
Great. Thank you so much. Yeah, so following that red line, it represents the inputs and the outputs. The finished good is an input to the household. That household output is the labor, land, capital going into the business, factors of production going into the business. Coming out of the business is the cost of the finished good, cost of goods sold. That goes into the marketplace, and the household, the finished good is going into the household. And it's cyclical. You see it goes around and around and around. It never stops. It's the way it always works. Now, looking at this green line going the opposite direction, okay, we see the outputs and inputs as it relates to revenue and expenses, income and spending. Okay, here's how it works. Let's start on the household side of these. Households spend money to buy finished goods that the firm made, right? And that spending that the household did is revenue for the company, right? It's like, let's say my company sells pens, okay? A pen. The pen costs the company 50 cents to make. They sell it for $1, okay? They want to make a profit. So the company sells the household a pen for $1. The cost of goods sold is 50 cents. The spending, the revenue coming in is $1, okay? 50-cent profit. Well, not quite. almost 50-cent profit, because then they have to pay wages, rent, and other expenses. The company has to pay their expenses. So, in summation, the company spends the dollar to buy the pen that costs the company 50 cents to make. The revenue is a dollar going into the firm. Going out of the firm are wages paid to the employees, rent, other expenses of the company, and then ultimately profit that the company made. The wages is what is paid to the household as a form of income. Make sense?
Yes.
All right, thank you so much. Yeah, so that's, yeah, it's cyclical. That's why I call it circular flow. But we see how it goes, you know, how households and firms interact with each other. Okay, PPF. I don't know who came up with that acronym. Production Possibilities Frontier. So the circular flow chart that you just saw represents inputs and outputs for both households and for firms. Now we're going to explore this concept called the Production Possibilities Frontier. Okay, this gets a little muddy, so I'm going to try my best to work through it with you. So Production Possibilities Frontier, also known as PPF. PPF is a graph that represents the combination of output that the economy can possibly produce. Say that again. The PPF, the Production Possibilities Frontier, is a graph that represents the combinations of output that the economy can possibly produce. Let's break that down a little bit further. There is this thing called capacity. Capacity is the limit of how much we can produce. Capacity. Okay, capacity. Think of a warehouse. Okay, a warehouse can only store so much product. That's their capacity. 100% capacity means the warehouse is full. Can't accept any more product. Our warehouse is full. We're at 100% capacity. The same can be said with production. I have X number of employees that are manufacturing pens and pencils to sell. I can only produce X number of pens and pencils. That is my maximum capacity of production. Okay? Capacity, that's what capacity is. Don't hear me throw that word around, capacity. That's why it's important to understand. This Production Possibilities Frontier tells us what our capacity is. What is the maximum we can produce? And of course, what is the maximum we can produce is given by a number of inputs, the factors of production, and technology, I guess. The more technology advances, the probably we can produce more, allegedly. I don't know how that's exactly true. But. So looking at the graph, how much we could produce. So a couple more examples. I gave you an example of a pen and pencil manufacturer in a warehouse. Here are a couple more examples. Computers and wheat. There is a couple of finite resources that we have. We have labor, which is measured in hours. Okay, the average full-time employee in the United States works 40 hours per week. The average part-time employee in the United States works anywhere between 26 and 32 hours per week. Those are the number of hours. that we have capacity for. Maximum 40 hours for full time, maximum 32 hours for part time. That's based on labor laws. The economy has a total of 50,000 labor hours per month available for production. In other words, my company has allocated 50,000 labor hours per month to my employees. That's a mix of both part-time and full-time. But 50,000 hours is the maximum I can provide my employees per month. Yeah, so that's a lot of employees. I don't know how many. It's a lot. So the company manufactures both computers and wheat. I don't know what company even does that. Let's just go with it. Okay, my company manufactures both computers and wheat. So I guess I have a farm and a computer manufacturing facility. Makes no sense at all, but let's just go with it. Producing one computer, this is a really old example. Producing one computer requires 100 hours of labor per computer. Okay? Producing 1 ton of wheat requires 10 hours of labor, thanks to technology. So we have a nice, cute little chart here, okay? We have employment of labor hours, and we have production. Now remember, I have a maximum of 50,000 labor hours available per month. If I have 50,000 total hours dedicated to computers, I can manufacture 500 computers. How do we figure that out? Well, it says it takes 100 hours to make one computer. So if I have 50,000 labor hours divided by 100 hours, that gives me 500 computers total. Now let's look at the rest of this. If I dedicate 40,000 hours to computers, that means I could dedicate 10,000 hours to wheat. Remember, maximum of 50,000 hours. I want to utilize all of my hours. Example C, I can split the 50,000 between computers and wheat. Option D, I can dedicate 10,000 hours to computers, 40,000 to wheat. And option E, nothing to computers and 50,000 to wheat. And we can see what happens with production, the amount of output, right? So to calculate the number of computers I can make, remember it's 100 hours per computer. So 50,000 divided by 100 is 500. 40,000 divided by 100 is 400, so forth and so on. For wheat, it's the number of hours divided by 10 hours per ton. So for letter B, it's 10,000 divided by 10, 1,000. So forth and so on. You see how this example is going. So, based off of this information, the company can get a good understanding of where they should be allocating their labor hours, whether it be in computers or wheat or both. And based off of this example, in my opinion, I would be somewhere between letter B and C. And the reason being is because we can get a higher yield of production. And I'll talk more about that in a second. So, as we saw, 500 in zero production, 400,000, 250, 2,500, 100, 4,000, 0, 5,000. That's the levels of production. We can graph this. And this graph represents the points at which I'm comparing my production of computers to my production of wheat. The idea here is that somewhere in the middle is my sweet spot, right? I'm making enough wheat and enough computers, and I'm not sacrificing one or the other. So on that graph we just saw, we can find a point that represents 100 computers and 3,000 tons of wheat. So 100 computers and 3,000 tons of wheat would be here. Okay? It'd be just below this one that's just 4,000. It'd be like right about there. Okay, we'll call that point F. So here's a question I have for the class. Would it be possible for the economy to produce this combination of the two goods? Why or why not? So, in other words, if I can this company produce, can this company produce 100 computers and 3,000 tons of wheat? What do you think? Can I produce 100 computers and 3,000 tons of wheat?
I think it could.
You think I could? Why?
I'm not sure. I feel like it's just a logical thing that we can do it at the same time, or we're at that point.
You're right. You're right, Dario. So we could easily do that, right? I mean, look at our line. Look where it maxes out. Okay, because remember, this this PPF it represents the production, right? And so if we look at it here, if 3,000 tons of wheat, 100 computers, that is well below the capacity. It's, so yes, the short answer is yes. I can easily produce that because it's well below the capacity of the company's ability to produce. So what about the next question? Can I produce 300 computers and 35 tons of wheat? Can I produce 300 computers and 3,500 tons of wheat? What do you think?
No,
No,
don't have the
why?
capacity for it.
I'm sorry, Javon. Why was that?
I said no, it doesn't have the capacity.
Exactly. It's above the capacity. I can't produce that much because I only have a certain number of hours. I have 50,000 labor hours a month to work with. That would be way above the capacity. So yeah, you're absolutely right. It's above capacity. I wouldn't be able to do it. So point F that we talked about, yes, I could easily do point F, but it's not efficient. Because I said, listen, yeah, we could easily do F, but our capacity is higher than that. We could easily do more than that. And uh, to your point, uh, 300 computers, 3,500 tons a week. No, I can't do that. I only have 50,000 hours. That would require me to have 65,000 hours. I don't have that kind of capacity. It's above capacity. So, uh, capacity, you can also think of capacity as efficiency, right? Capacity means that I have a set number of hours or set amount of space, right? At 100% capacity, that means I'm using all my hours. I'm using all my space. I'm doing the absolute best that I can. I'm being extremely efficient. So efficiency means we're using all of our resources. So in the earlier example, points A through E represented, along that line, represented full utilization. If I were to only produce 100 computers and 3,000 tons of wheat, that's well below my capacity. So I'd be underutilizing my employees. And I would have to eventually lay people off because there's not enough work, right? If I'm below my efficiency, if I'm below that line, that's when people become unemployed, the factories slow down, that's underutilizing the resources. And then anywhere above the maximum capacity, it's simply not possible. I can't work 150%. I can't give you 125%. I can only go up to my maximum capacity, my maximum efficiency. So some of other things to take into consideration with this production measure is if I'm manufacturing more than one good, I need to sacrifice one or the other at some point. Okay, and what happens is there's a shift. There's a shift in the level of production from one good to another. There's more demand in computers than there is a wheat, so I'm going to shift my hours more toward the computers than I am the wheat. Opposite is also true in other months. I can shift more toward the wheat and back off of the computers. So there's that flexibility, but it has to be within that range of 100% capacity to be efficient. We call this a trade-off, right? It's where you sacrifice more of one good over another. It's a trade-off. So a lot, and this goes a lot with what we talked about last week. Remember, we talked about trade-offs, we talked about opportunity cost. The opportunity cost is also reflected in this measurement because I'm sacrificing the cost of making more of one product over another. So in our example, and remember this line represents maximum capacity or maximum efficiency. 5,000 tons of wheat, 0 computers, 0 tons of wheat, 500 computers, everywhere in between, that's maximum capacity or maximum efficiency. And anywhere below that line is underutilization, and anywhere above it is simply not possible because it's above capacity. This line represents a slope. In graphical terms, that is a slope. That's what the line represents. Rise over the run is another cute way of saying it. Rise over run is called a slope. For those of you who haven't, I think most of you probably went through statistics already. If you haven't, good class to take. So, yes, the rise over run is called a slope. This is the slope of the line. So how do we find opportunity cost? So the opportunity cost of manufacturing, let's see, one computer is equivalent to 1 ton of wheat. That's the opportunity cost. So if I make one less computer, that means I can produce 10 tons more of wheat. Right? That's the opportunity cost. So here's another example. We've got 2 countries here. These 2 countries, France and England, they make both wine and clothing. Wine and clothing. Okay? These are our 2 products, wine and clothing. Yeah, France makes great wine, absolutely. Let's take a look here. France can make 600, I guess, bottles of wine and 0 clothing. Or they can make 0 bottles of wine and 300 articles of clothing. Whereas in England, they can make 200 bottles of wine and 0 clothing, or they can make 0 bottles of wine, 300 clothing. These are the maximum efficiency lines. These are the maximum capacity lines, the slopes, yeah? So the question is, which country is the opportunity cost of clothing lower? Which country is the opportunity cost of clothing lower? Let's take a look. It's England, because this slope is not as steep as France. So that makes sense. So if we look at the slopes, right? The slope for France is much steeper than it is for England. So the opportunity cost is not as bad, right, in England as it would be in France. If I gave up 100 bottles of wine to make 10 additional clothing, my slope would be much steeper. My opportunity cost would be much steeper. And in England, that difference is less than 100. So going back to our earlier example, 5,000 tons of wheat, 0 computers, 500 computers, 0 tons of wheat. When there's additional resources available or improvements to technology, the economics can produce more computers. That makes perfect sense. So we call this a shift when there is an improvement, a shift. This shift comes with growth. When the economy grows, it improves, ideally. That's a model, right? Ideally. When the economy grows, it improves. Let's say the economy grows and the technology to manufacture computers improves. We have more robotics that handle the assembly of computers. So therefore, I can increase my output. I can increase my maximum efficiency, my capacity. I can increase my capacity. So when the economy grows, I can produce more wheat and more computers because the technology has improved. The only thing is it makes the slope a little bit steeper over time. We'll talk more about it. When there's a straight line, it means that there's consistent opportunity cost. Cost of one computer is 10 tons of wheat. That is a straight line that goes straight left to right, or it's a straight horizontal line, left to right. 1, 10. If the line, if the slope is outward bowed, it means there's increasing opportunity cost with additional units of output. So each additional unit of output represents an increased cost for that level of output. Looks like this. That's a kind of a terrible example, but so in this example we have both beer and mountain bikes. And what this represents is that the increased level of output means that our slope becomes skewed because there's a shift in the economy. Okay. People will ride more mountain bikes and drink less beer during the summer. Yeah, maybe not. I don't know. But that represents a shift in the economy, a shift in taste, a shift in consumer preference. And the opposite is also true during the other months. But when this shift happens, the PPF line becomes steeper, which means the opportunity cost to produce an additional mountain bike increases. So a couple of points here. Point A represents the opportunity cost of a mountain bike. It's low at the top of the slope because there's a much lower gradient. Yeah. Workers produce more beer when those are better suited to building mountain bikes. Makes sense. At point B, the opportunity cost is much greater because the slope of the gradient is much steeper. Producing more mountain bikes would require a shift of employees or hours from the beer production. I don't know why you would put those two examples. But we can see that different workers have different skills. That's what that bowed outward curve represents. In that earlier example, beer manufacturing and mountain bike manufacturing, yeah, of course, they're, the employees are going to be better at beer making that have been doing it for years. The other employees will be better at building mountain bikes because they've been doing it for years. They have different skill sets. They're totally different jobs, they're totally different processes, they're totally different components involved, different processes, right? So the workers, of course, are going to be different for manufacturing very different products. So that's going to represent a problem. There's different opportunity costs for manufacturing very different products. Uh, and a lot of it has to do with the difference in resources, the mix of resources that vary the opportunity cost. Let's take a look at the difference between micro and macroeconomics. Macroeconomics, which is this course that we're in right now, represents the study of the larger picture. Just call it the larger picture, right? It's a study of economic-wide phenomena, including inflation, unemployment, economic growth. We're looking at the whole country, okay? The whole country, the whole picture. Microeconomics, which is the course that usually comes after this one. Yeah, 202. The course that comes after this one, Econ 202, is the study of households and individual firms. Okay, it's the smaller picture, it's the more micro picture, right? Macro, big picture. Micro, smaller picture, the smaller piece of the puzzle. Micro is a piece of the puzzle, macro is the whole puzzle. Economists serve as policy advisors. They try to describe how the world works as a result from economics. They look at evidence. They look at minimum wage laws, cause and effect on unemployment. They try to normalize economics by informing governments on what they should do to impact the economy. For example, raising the minimum wage, providing other incentives for work, so on. All of those types of things influence the economy. Okay, so earlier I said I'd give you more real world examples, more current examples. Okay, here's a current example for you. I don't know if you've noticed, but we're in a pandemic. You know, if you haven't noticed that, I don't know what to tell you about. So we're in this pandemic, and at the very beginning, everyone got sent home, right? Said, hey, stay home. You know. So what happened when everyone got sent home? Unemployment skyrocketed. Okay, we had 26% at the peak. That is extraordinary. We haven't seen anything like that ever in recorded history. That was worse than the Great Depression. 26% is very, very high. The Great Depression, it topped out at 20 to 22% unemployment, which is extremely high, by the way. So what that tells us is almost 1 in every 3 people were unemployed at the peak of the pandemic, about a year and a half. So what happened? When things started to subside, people started working again. So the government said, okay, we got to get people back to work. How are we going to do that? Well, let's think about increasing the minimum wage, which they haven't done, but they've thought about. Employers thought about ways to incentivize people to come back to work. Oh, we'll give you a bonus, oh, a signing bonus, whatever, which is happening now, by the way. Pretty much everywhere's hiring. I've never seen anything like this. And you've probably heard that a lot too. But the reality is the wages still aren't really there, which is, in my opinion, the greater problem at hand. But that just kind of shows you from an economic perspective of how economists influence changes in the economy. They recommend policy changes like increasing minimum wage to satisfy employees' desire to work. It encourages more work, right? So there's a lot of schools of thought behind it, but it just kind of shows you how things really are, right? There's positive and normative things about the economy. Prices rise when the government increases quantity of money. That's called inflation. Letter A is inflation. Prices rise when the government increases the quantity of money. So what happened? So during the pandemic, the government uh, wanted to subsidize everything. They wanted to give you an extra check every month, right? $300, $600, whatever. Oh, here's a check for 1,200, blah blah blah, right? To to supplement the fact that you're at home not working, while you were also collecting unemployment. What did that do? It increased the amount of money in the economy, the amount of physical cash in the economy. You might think, oh, that's great. I can go and spend more. It's good right now, but what does it mean in the long term? When there's too much money in the economy, it causes the price of everything to go up. So that's why you went to the grocery store last week and you're like, well, dang, the price of grapes went up 30 cents a pound. How did that happen? Oh, the price of gasoline went up. Oh, the price of this went up. The price of that went up. The price of everything went up. Why? Because the government printed too much money, circulating in the economy, and now we're all paying for it. That's letter A. It's called inflation. Letter B, government should print less money. Yes, they should print less money, but will they? I don't know. C, tax cuts will stimulate the economy. Yeah, that's mostly true. That's mostly true. Tax cuts stimulate the economy. How? You have more money in your pocket to spend when you're paying less to Uncle Sam. Letter D, increase in the price of burritos will cause an increase in the consumer demand for music downloads. What? Yeah, well, it basically what it means is uh, there are relationships between different products that are sold in the economy. And when one of more is sold, there will be an increased demand in something else. They're interrelated. Yeah? Okay. Tax cuts are normative. Uh, the relationship between burritos and music downloads, it's an intrinsic relationship between two separate products. Why do economists disagree with each other? Well, there's different methods of going about things. They have different viewpoints. Uh, they have different values. The policies are typically different when people have different values. It's normal. It's normal for people to disagree with each other. Oh, ticket resales. Well, this is kind of a fun one. Do economists like ticket resales? Yes, absolutely. So let's say you got a ticket to go see your favorite music artist to come to town, and you got yours on Ticketmaster.com, okay, which is like the preferred vendor website. There are a bunch of aftermarket, I call them aftermarket. They're resellers of tickets, right? You can go onto other websites and get them at quote unquote a lesser price, or sometimes even more. Right? The idea behind it is that uh, this causes variation within prices for something that would intrinsically go up in value. So that's why most economists think that's a good thing because it creates that variation. Okay, couple of key points here. Okay, rent never goes down, so one's not like a real thing. Uh, tariffs. Tariffs are taxes on imported goods. The United States and multiple other countries engage in tariffs as a form of trade. It's a tax on a good that comes in from another country. That tax usually goes to support the gross domestic product, which we'll talk about. The U.S. should eliminate agricultural subsidiaries. I don't think so. That's a terrible idea. Because it'll cause a lot of farms to go out of business. Local and state governments should eliminate subsidiaries to professional sports franchises. Yes, they already make enough of their money. These are all just percentages these percentages represent economists agreeing with each other. That's all this tells us. So the general consensus is economists typically agree with each other. That's what all those slides told us. Okay, I'm not going to go through the summary stuff. Okay, so that is the conclusion of chapter 2. Any questions on how to think like an economist? We're good? Okay. I'm going to stop the recording here. We'll pick up on chapter 3. Hold on just a second.